Hi everybody, welcome to our second video in the tutorial charting in single case research. This video today is going to focus a bit more on terms that we'll be using to refer to components of the figures that we put together. Some of them are going to sound very familiar, but we do have a couple different terms that we'll use to discriminate when we talk about data we'll use for drawing lines on a figure versus data that we'll use to show actual behavior of an individual. So going through the terms, we're going to refer to a plot as any individual visual component. So for example, this whole line chart here, or this whole line plot here, this is one plot, and a plot is just an instance of this line chart. So there are three plots right here in this multiple baseline figure. Usually when we refer to a chart or a figure, we refer to the entirety of all that visual information together. So whereas you might see figure 1 in a published article, figure 1 in an article might actually be a multiple baseline with individual plots within it. So that's plot, that's figure. Data is pretty straightforward. Those are the numerical values that you have that you want to illustrate visually. Data is put into the spreadsheet, and once it's into the spreadsheet, we could reference it in the plots and figures we put together. Now, lines have a couple different meanings in Excel. We have lines that connect similar or related data, or help us visually categorize connected or similar data. So for example, there are lines connecting individual baseline points. So these are lines between actual data in our spreadsheet. And sometimes we also have other lines. And these lines are also similar to other related data, but they're distinct, either in their color or what they represent. And those are lines when we speak of lines referring to data. There are also lines that are drawn onto figures that aren't necessarily data, but are more an element of the plot or the figure. So, for example, a phase change line is a line that can be drawn on the chart. And we often use phase lines to very clearly demarcate very, very large significant changes. So, for example, when treatment conditions change from some baseline arrangement to some new kind of arrangement, and that's when we would see a phase line right there. Lines and markers. Markers are often these very distinct shapes that represent the points of data. Generally, we only ever see them in black in research. There are some cases where you do want to have a little bit of color, but generally black is a good default. Our lines are generally solid, except for a few caveats that we'll get into later. So generally, whenever you have lines, they should be solid. Our data lines, these type of lines, should not pass through solid lines like phase lines. That helps visually make it very clear that something substantial changed, and that two data points aren't connected because they are quite distinct. Phase lines should be vertical, black in color. They should be solid. If it's a change in phase, say like a baseline to a treatment condition, and they should have no markers at their end. When you draw in phase line markers, they often have like a square or a circle, but we don't want that, so we get rid of them. plots and figures often have labels, so when appropriate, those are either drawn on the figure as a legend or drawn onto the plot directly to indicate what these data represent. So in this case, we have this baseline type of behavior referenced by this label, so that the reader can understand everything that's on this side of the plot with this color relates to each of these participants going down. Whereas this treatment condition, let's say functional communication treatment, with these solid connected points, and that holds true for the rest of the plot. These are some of the terms I will be using throughout this series. I'd make note to look over these a few times, so that when we explain just which parts of the plot need to be modified, that terms are very clear and not misunderstood. It should also be noted that each of these will eventually refer to a different spot in the settings that we'll use, so learning these terms becomes very useful when you're trying to maneuver and make specific modifications to your plots. That is about all the time we have for today. In the next tutorial, we'll be beginning with simple line charts and how to put together the figures that we saw in the earlier tutorial. Alright, stay tuned to the website and the channel, and I'll see you guys then.